What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the channel. Today, it's been a little while since we brought to you any of this Tampa Bay Buccaneers, basically total rebuild franchise that we did. Now, I decided it's a good idea to use this franchise as a tool to show you guys some tips to help you rebuild successfully in Madden 20, because there's a lot of things that people don't quite grasp, don't do right, and kind of skip over that really makes rebuilding easier and more successful in the long run. So, let's jump into it. I have 7 tips here for you guys, and the first tip is going to be training. And I'm not actually going to be able to show you specifically the training that's available because I am in Super Bowl week, so I'm not going to have training available, but just know that doing your training every single week and getting the gold medal, and once you get the gold medal, you can sim it every week after that with the gold medal results, is going to get you a ton of XP. Now, this team, if you guys follow this along, or if you want to go back and look at the team real quick that we started this with, this team was like 68, 75, and 69 in terms of their overalls. Now, just through one season, I've gotten them up significantly overall across the board. All of my players have progressed pretty well. We've gotten them quite a great amount of XP, and I'm going to show you real quick here through upgrading the players how much XP you get from just giving these guys the training every single week. So Devin White started out as like a low 70s player, and he's now up to going to be a 79 overall player here, and with confidence he's an 81. So in one short season we were able to get him up 6 overall, and what you can see through the progression history is that when they do their weekly training, it's going to give them a bonus 300 XP, and it's going to give them additional other bonus XP depending on how well you do in those drills. And so that's really important. It's going to give you a ton of XP comparatively if you did not do the training. And it takes, a couple minutes to get the gold medal the first time, and then once you're done with the gold medal, like I said, you can simulate that gold medal drill every time after that and reap the benefits of having the increased XP reward. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is very simple and straightforward, and this is going to apply to all stages of your rebuild. Focus on youth and value, and you guys will have seen that a lot in my prior video where we started this franchise, that we're doing a rebuild. When doing a rebuild, you're not going to be focusing on player overalls necessarily. You're going to be focusing on youth. You need to build in the long term, and you need guys that have the ability to grow as players. And so what you'll see with the majority of this team is, yes, we kept a couple of our older stars, guys like Mike Evans, but we traded for youthful players that have a lot of room to grow for us, like Leonard Fournette. We kept O.J. Howard. We hung on to Chris Godwin, hung on to Vita Vea, and players like that. Devin White is a good opportunity to grow, and we have a lot of players that are in that like 22 to 25-year-old range that are going to be able to grow for us. And that's really important because not all rebuilds are going to happen immediately. You're not going to be making a ton of trades or anything like that in some rebuilds, especially if you're trying to do it realistic. So you have to focus on the youth aspect of things, and when you do make trades, you have to focus on the value aspect of things. If you're trying to do realistic trades, you're not going to be able to go out and get whoever you want, so you have to go for value. Guys like Jalen Mills, who we signed as or traded for because he was on the trade block. You have to go out to that trade block and find people that are of decent value compared to what you have to give up to actually obtain them. And so that's really important. Make sure that you focus on the value of the players that you're getting, and make sure that you're only acquiring young players. For the most part, when you're doing a rebuild, you need to acquire more youth in order to give yourself a good path forward. And so that's tip number 2, is focus on youth and focus on value. Tip number 4 that I want to focus about or want to show you guys is don't forget your coach XP. There's a lot of really good bonuses that you can get through the coach XP tab and by winning games. And so you'll see up in the top right corner, once that music thing goes away, we have 8,600 XP for our coach on the season. And so all you have to do is go into My Coach and go to Spend Coach XP, and you can purchase a bunch of different really powerful upgrades for your coach that are going to make your life a lot easier. So just to give you guys a summary of what some of these things do, expert scouting is going to give you more scouting points. So if you want to be better able to evaluate the draft and evaluate those players and have a more successful draft, this is a great skill to purchase for you guys. If you want to get better returns on your trades and not have to give as much up in your trades to the system, to the CPU, get the Master Trade Negotiator, and it will make your trade offers more likely to go through. Then you have all of these free agency influence ones, and this is what I recommend doing. I recommend waiting and saving some of this XP for whenever you hit the actual free agency period, because then you'll be able to tell which players are out there, which players you need, and which attribute to select. And so if I'm bidding on a tight end, for example, and I have the same offer in as another tight end or as another team, but I have this tight end free agency influence trait, it's going to make them more likely to sign with me over that other team. And so these are really useful traits to have, but you're going to want to kind of save up some of your XP and determine which players are out there for you to acquire first. And that's going to lead into some of my other tips about actually having a plan when you go into the offseason, stuff like that. And not spending willy-nilly, but we're going to get into that in a minute. So I did want to highlight this. We can go to player retention. This is how you can make sure that you re-sign and prevent players from retiring. So, you know, a good example is if you have an older quarterback and you don't want them to retire, you can do their quarterback retirement influence. So say you have an older player on your team that's helping your rebuild. They're kind of a cornerstone for your franchise, and you're trying to build around them and transition away from them. You can get them to basically try and not retire, you know, for one more season by buying this influence, and then you'll have them around for a little bit longer to still be able to build around as a cornerstone for your team. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense for you guys, and you can do that at any position. Then you can do the re-sign influence. So if you're having trouble re-signing a player, they'll be more likely to re-sign if you do purchase the re-sign influence thing. So make sure you do capitalize on that. With player progression, you're definitely going to want to focus on these traits above all else. And I told you guys how the training boosts earlier were, or the training is the #1 tip into increasing your players' overalls. Well, if you get the training boosts, you're going to get more XP out of your players for everything that they do. And so say you want to really progress a quarterback, you're going to then need to purchase the QB training boost so that you can boost the XP that they gain over and over and over again and get, you know, stacked boosts to how much XP you actually get. And so basically the tip is don't neglect your coach's XP and don't forget to spend it, because this is all very valuable stuff. Any one of these, any which direction you choose to go, these traits are going to help you no matter what. They're all here to help you, and they're really easy to access, really easy to understand what they actually do for you. So don't forget to spend your coach's XP. I'm going to spend that in a little bit once I figure out what we actually want to do moving forward. So that's tip #3. Don't forget your coach's XP. #4 has to do with something that, again, I can't show you on the screen right now, but what I can do is I can show you a specific player that it affected. So in the middle of the season, you're going to get pop-ups for players to ask them to do certain goals, and they'll get a development upgrade. I had one this season for DJ Chark. What you want to do is make sure that you execute on those player goals or those player pop-ups that come up for you. And so DJ Chark started off with normal development, but because I successfully got him a 100-yard receiving game whenever he asked for it, I got him star development and a 10,000 XP boost, which gave him 2 upgrades in order to actually make his player better. So he started off in the low 70s, and I was able to upgrade him a few times this season because I got him that upgrade, and he did pretty well for himself. So he's up to star development with a 74 overall. So he's a pretty solid #3 receiver to fill in behind Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. So make sure that you pay attention to those pop-ups. Don't disregard them, and make sure you try as hard as you can to execute on those, because you can get huge rewards for those. You can get massive XP boosts, and you can get development upgrades, which helps you in the long term. So DJ Chark having star development as only a 23-year-old means that his ceiling just got all that much higher, and he can be a real star for us as we move forward. So that's tip #4. Don't forget to execute on those pop-up goals for your players. Tip number 5 is specifically about team composition is what I want to talk about, and which positions to focus on. Now, you specifically will know personally which positions you need to have to be good and in order to execute. In my case, good wide receivers are a good option to help support a young quarterback, and a good running game is always a good option. But the one thing that I want to recommend for you guys is to focus on the offensive and defensive lines, and the reasons why are they completely determine whether you move the ball or not. Now, don't get me wrong, this offensive line is not very good. I'm not going to lie about the fact that I blew it up, and I performed pretty well with a bad offensive line. But for most players, for the average player, you're going to need a good, slightly above average or significantly above average offensive line to actually get the ball moving and protect you when you're passing and actually be able to run the ball. And that's really important. You can't progress your players, you can't win games, you can't gain extra XP if you don't focus on building your offensive line. So that's tip number 1, is if you want this rebuild to work in the long term, you have to focus on the offensive line. Now, what I'm going to do in my off season is I am going to personally focus on my offensive line. Like I said, this offensive line isn't very good. It was patchwork just to get me by for one season, but I'm going to build around Ali Marpet, and I'm going to keep Donovan Smith around, but I'm going to fill in these other gaps through free agency and the draft. And so that's going to lead into my other tips later on, but definitely build through your offensive line. That is the most important position. And then the second most important way to start your rebuild is to focus on the defensive line. If you can stop the run, no matter how bad your defense is, if you can stop the run against any team, the AI, against users, you give yourself a fighting chance. Because the way I look at it is, when you're playing pass defense, no matter what, your guys aren't going to cover. They just don't. No matter how good your players are, they're really not going to perform their job very well. And so whenever you force a player to pass, you're at least giving yourself a fighting chance compared to if you had a good team. And so what you need to do is focus on the run stuffing part of the game and the D-line. If you don't have a good D-line and you can't stop the run, it's going to be really hard for you to give yourself a fighting chance against anybody. And so when you do your rebuild, focus on your D-line, focus on your offensive line, and focus on the interior. Like they say, the old saying, the game's, football is won in the trenches, and that is never more true than when you're doing a rebuild and you don't have skill at your other positions. If you're weak at your other positions, you're going to need to try and win the trenches in order to give yourself a chance. And so that is tip number 5, I believe it is to focus on your lines, your offensive and defensive line, when you're doing your rebuild, in free agency, in the draft, because that's going to be one of the biggest helpers in terms of getting the rest of your team to perform well. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is, I don't want to do these out of order, but I guess this is a good time to talk about my next tip, which would be scouting players and having a plan when you go into free agency and the draft. So you need to evaluate your team. You need to seriously evaluate your team and decide which positions are most important for you. And like I said, focus on the O-line, focus on the D-line, but maybe that's not what you need specifically. Maybe your rebuild doesn't require that. So you need to go in to your roster before you approach free agency and before you approach the draft and really decide, what am I going to do? What do I need to do to really improve this team? For me, I need to get a center and a guard, and then I'll feel comfortable with us moving forward. I'm good with my skill positions. I can develop a young quarterback, so I don't need to get a quarterback with my first overall pick, but if one falls to me, sure, I can get a first-round pick. And that's kind of my draft strategy is, if a really good quarterback falls to me, I'll take them, but I'm not going to go out of my way to get a quarterback. I'm going to fill the positions of need, like my offensive line, line, and I'm going to try and help my defense out a little bit because my defense is struggling a little bit. I'll try and get a good defensive lineman to add. I'll try and do something along those lines to really try and help out the positions of need. And then you also want to consider how many draft picks you have. And so you have to consider what you have on your roster. Right now, I have 61 players on my roster. I recommend before you ever go into off-season, go into your team and cut everybody that you're not going to have on the roster as you move forward. Go in and cut all of these low overall players. Go in and cut these 55s or 60s or whatever that you're not going to keep on the roster. Cut anybody else that's old that you're not going to keep on the roster, anybody that you're planning to move on from, and get a picture of how many players you have, because generally speaking, you're going to have 7 draft picks, and they're going to automatically be signed to your team. And so you have to make room for 7 players on your team. And in addition to that, if you're going to then sign players to your team in free agency, you're going to need room for them. And so what I see a lot of people doing when they go to free agency is they just, try and pick up all the possible players that they can. Well, then you filled all your needs, and then your draft is invaluable, or sorry, useless is kind of the word I'm looking for. Don't fill all your needs in free agency because you'll make your draft obsolete. You need to be able to hit on your draft and actually pick up positions of need. And so that leads me into my next point. I'm going to go ahead and advance forward to free agency and show you guys what my next point is, which is to not overspend and overcommit in free agency. And actually, I'm going to have to... I'm gonna have to re-sign a lot of players, so I'm gonna not go ahead and go to free agency, but I will talk about what you need to do in terms of free agency to avoid the big no-nos and avoid doing what is a big mistake that a lot of people do. And so this goes into, I believe, tip number 6. Yeah, this is tip number 6. Tip number, I think I miscounted. I think I have 8 tips, but I'm not sure. The next tip is to not overspend in free agency. I know that it's tempting to go in there when you see all those high overall players out there, trying to fill your positions of need in order to bring them back and make your rebuild something worthwhile. However, don't pay players more than they're worth, because in the long term, you're going to regret it. Once your rebuild is on its feet, once your team's on its feet and you're successful, you're going to regret paying a guy like Tim Williams. What does he want? He wants how many $1 million per year? You're going to regret paying him $5 million per year combined between his salary and his signing bonus, because he's just a 75 overall. He's 26 years old. He's not very good. Don't overpay players. And don't sign too many players. Your team already has a idea of where it's going. You did what you did on purpose. Like for my team, I did what I did on purpose. Just because there's good halfbacks out there or good receivers doesn't mean I need to go out and sign them. Or just because there's a good quarterback doesn't mean I need to sign them. I have my idea of what I need to do moving forward. And so I'm not going to go out there and sign 50 players. I'm going to target offensive linemen, sign 1, 2, maybe 3 offensive linemen, and find holes for them. And if I do sign those players, then I'm going to realize, okay, now I have 7 draft picks that I need to utilize. How am I going to utilize these draft picks? Well, I can use 1 draft pick for a quarterback. I can maybe draft another tight end to back up, but I don't really need much else on the offense. Okay, so that's 2 draft picks down. Okay, I need maybe 1 more linebacker. I'm cool with my outside linebackers. I need an extra corner, and I need a D lineman. So I'm up to 5 draft picks. Well, then what am I doing with my other 2 draft picks? They're just a waste at that point. So maybe what you should do is, instead of signing 3 offensive linemen, I sign 2 offensive linemen and draft one of the other ones and utilize all of my draft picks in a way that is meaningful and actually creating a plan in order to move forward and not waste the potential of what I've done here, and not sign excess players that aren't going to be able to play for you, and don't draft players that aren't going to be able to play for you. Just because a great running back falls to me in the draft doesn't mean that I should take him, because he's never going to play behind Fournette. He's never going to get XP. I should take players that are going to fit my position. And so you might get a steal in the draft or something like that, but realistically, it might be better for you to draft a player at a position of need. And so basically the tip is don't overspend in free agency, and it combines with the tip of having a plan for your offseason and keeping in mind how many players you're going to be able to pick up, how many roster spots they're actually going to fill, and how many draft picks you have. And so, like, for my team, for example, I believe I traded for a bunch of high-end draft picks. And so, you know, with my roster, is it a good idea for me to go and draft players because I have, you know, 2 seconds and 2/3? And so realistically, if you consider second and third round players starters, I have 5 starters here that I could potentially draft. And do I have 5 starter holes to fill? Well, yeah, but what if I sign free agents? If I sign free agents, then some of these picks become obsolete, because they're not really filling any specific position of need. And so hopefully that kind of gets you thinking in the right direction and how I approach the offseason. I will bring you guys another episode of the offseason of this Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise, kind of recapping where we've been with this and how I've gotten up to the point that I've gotten up to. If that is something you would like to see basically a continuation of the tips that I've given you, you know, put into action, into real life action, let me know down in the comment section right now. Go down there and let me know. Let me know by leaving a like on this video that you liked it and you want to see more of this type of content, and subscribe to the channel for more. Those are my tips. I do have one more tip it's like kind of a half of a tip before I go. It's kind of a parting ways thing. One thing that I see a lot of people doing is giving up on their players at any certain point in the game or any certain point in the season. And that's something that I recommend that you guys avoid. And so what I mean by that is, you know, your quarterback, for example. You're starting a 70 overall Mason Rudolph, or you're starting a 65 overall Trace McSorley. Don't just take them out of a game when they're having a bad game. You need to commit to somebody in order for them to gain XP. Mason Rudolph's never going to get better if you keep taking him out of the game once he throws an interception or two. You know, you have to leave them in there and allow them to get as much experience as possible for them to level up and get higher. Once their overall gets higher, once their stats get higher, they'll start performing better. It's a very simple equation. Like I said, don't give up on your players. And that's pretty much all I have for you guys for this video. Like I said, leave some feedback down in the comment section, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I hope you guys have a great one. I hope this video helped you out in some ways, and if it did, let me know down below. Have a good one. See ya.